Hello and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi, my name is Ness. I like to talk about books. Today I'm going to be doing my March and April wrap up, which is quite a lot of books, so I really want to just get straight into it or else my camera will be like, no, not today. I've actually now read 20 books this year, which is pretty good for me, but when you have 200 unread books on your shelf, not really the best. I've done a whole host of reading. Some of this is middle grade, there's YA, there's adult, there's fantasy, contemporary. So I think I'm just going to start with the middle grade, work through the young adult, and then finish with the adult. So let's just get to it. I must say I have some absolute fantastic books in this wrap up, but I also have some really bad ones, or ones that I wasn't keen on. So that this video isn't 2 hours long, I will focus on the ones that I really enjoyed and spend less time talking about the ones that I didn't. So the first book is Nevermoor, The Trials of Morrigan Crow. This is a middle grade fantasy. Morrigan Crow is living in this bleak world where she is destined to die on her 11th birthday. Because her destiny is set in stone, her dad he's not really that interested in her, and the town that she lives in also isn't interested in her either. In fact, they actually really despise Morrigan, and anytime something goes wrong, they say it's because Morrigan has cursed them. But as her birthday is fast approaching, she is met by someone called Juniper North, who takes her back to his world and gives her the opportunity to apply for a sort of like an apprenticeship with this society called the Wanderness Society, which offers the ability to command magic and do really special talents. Although Morrigan is like, I am talentless, I don't know what I'm going to do in these trials, let's just wing it, because otherwise I'm going to have to go back to my hometown and die. So this book sees Morrigan trying to fit in with this new world and makes new friends, and also trying to get through these 4 trials to try and get into this society. This book is full of heartwarming adventure. The cast are great, the friendships are lovely, and the thing I love about middle grade is that the focus on friendship and family is always so heartwarming. There's always a lot of things that you can take away from it yourself. I really recommend this to people of all ages. This is actually a really long story. It's so detailed. I think adults would definitely enjoy this as well as children. The imagination it must take to create a book like this is amazing. Even as a reader, you're challenged in your imagination of being able to follow along in what the world building is doing. To me, this is probably one of the best middle grade books that I've read, and I would definitely recommend having a look into it if you haven't done so already. 5 stars. Absolutely one of the easiest 5 stars I've ever given. So I got halfway through talking about my next read, but then noticed my camera wasn't working, so I'm just going to start this part again. So we are now moving on to the young adult books. But for the first one I want to be talking about, it's on the older end of young adult because it does have some graphic scenes in it, and that is The Wrath in the Dawn, which is another book which was an easy 5-star read for me. This is an exciting retelling of Arabian Nights, and I absolutely loved it. It has complex and interesting characters, it has beautiful world building, it has a very unique magic system which I really loved, and essentially in this book we meet our main character, who is called Shahzad, and Shahzad is 16 and she is voluntarily becoming the wife of the Caliph. She is doing this knowing that she will likely only live for her wedding night, and the next day she will be killed by the Caliph, as is the last however many 100 wives the Caliph has had. But she's doing this because she wants to get revenge for her best friend who was forcibly taken to be the Caliph's wife and then was murdered the next day. She sees this as an opportunity to get close to him and kill him to get revenge for her best friend. However, she does hope that she can use her wit to try and live long enough to exact her revenge, and by doing this she starts telling him stories. However, things aren't all as they seem with the Caliph, for what is going on in the palace, for what is going on in the world. This is so complex. She obviously has this storyline in the palace, but then she has family back at home and a love interest back at home who is furious that she's made this decision that starts this idea about rescuing her from the palace, which starts a rebellion. Oh, this book is fantastic. It is phenomenal, and I can't wait to read the second and final book in this duology. This is probably my favourite retelling that I've ever read. I will absolutely be rereading this in the future, so that's why I'm keeping it on my shelves. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really intelligent retelling. The romance was great. The main character is like like a badass main character, but she's not like overly powerful. She has like some weaknesses as well, which makes it seem really real and down to earth. The premise really pulled me in on this one, and it absolutely paid off. It was phenomenal. One of the better YA books that I've read. Would recommend. Next was another fantastic young adult. I think I rated this either 5 or 4.5 stars. It was almost close to perfect, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This was my first Holly Jackson read, and I wasn't sure what to expect going into it, but I thought the writing was fantastic. It was a little bit predictable, but it's a young adult crime. I wasn't really expecting it to be like mind-boggling and mind-bending, but I really enjoyed the outcome and I really enjoyed the plot. Main character Pippa is right in her like extended project, like a final project to get extracurricular activity out of, and she decides that she wants to write about, or at least soft investigate, the murder of a girl that went to her school called Andy Bell, who was a couple of years older than her. The main belief is that Andy Bell was murdered by her boyfriend called Sal, but Sal unfortunately passed away a few days after that, and his death was ruled as suicide. For the police, this is very much a closed case. And for the village as well, they have a lot of hatred for Sal, and they also project that onto Sal's family, who still live in the village but have gone as a bit of a recluse. They don't really leave the house. Pippa does not believe that Sal is guilty of this crime and wants to find out more about Sal as a person. Her teachers explicitly say, "We don't think this is a good idea. You absolutely cannot have any contact with anyone in Sal's life or in Andy's life." But Pippa goes ahead anyway and takes the plunge and knocks on the door to speak to Sal's brother. And between her and Sal's brother, they set off trying to find the truth of what happened. I like adult crime. There's another 2 books to talk about in this that are adult crime, and I'd never read something really that was for younger readers. But if you do like young adults and you are willing to dip your feet into crime, I think this would be a great one to start off with. This is a trilogy, and I will be picking up book 2 to continue on with the story. I really liked Pippa as a character, and I really rooted for her all the way through. Another solid read. Another young adult that I read was The Devouring Gray, which I no longer have on me because I've passed on to someone else. Do want to make you aware that the author of The Devouring Gray was explicitly named in some bullying of other authors, which I absolutely do not condone. I had originally rated this book 3 stars, but upon reflection, I'm sure that I would rate it a little bit lower now. It was an okay read. It was like a little bit like wacky, like in the way that Riverdale is a little bit wacky, but I guess it was unique. It just wasn't that great. I did mainly read this because it does have like a sapphic element to it, but nothing is ever like played out. The characters are just hinted at being bisexual. So if you're going into it for that aspect, I wouldn't bother. In The Devouring Gray, our main character moves back to a small town in the middle of nowhere with her mum in the US. She comes to find out that she is one of the 4 founding families of this town, and the other descendants of the other founding families are like the town royalty. There's a lot of appreciation for their 4 ancestors, who apparently were able to trap this monster in this forest type thing. And the main character comes to realize that all 4 of them have some sort of like special ability. The main character keeps waking up in I think it's the Grey is the forest. I'm sure it's called the Grey. This is how much interest I took in this book. The main character keeps waking up in like this forest, which is seen as dangerous, and doesn't know how she got there, and there is like a monster plaguing her. There is also a storyline relating to the recent death of her sister and how that's affecting her emotionally, which I thought was the standout plot of this novel. The rest of it was a little just a bit too kooky and wacky for me, I think. So yeah, overall maybe like a 2.5, somewhere about the 2 to 3 star mark. Wasn't for me. If this was released like 10 years ago, I think it may have been a bit more successful. It just missed the mark with me. And then last up, for the explicit young adults, before we go into new adult type of books, I think is Bloom, which is a graphic novel, and it's sort of like a long comic. This does have a gay romance in it, which was honestly one of the cutest things since Heartstopper. I actually would really recommend this for fans of Heartstopper. So the main character works in his dad's bakery, and this other young gentleman here realizes that he needs to find part-time work and also applies to work in this bakery, and they form a really cute friendship. The plot is quite simple, if I'm honest, and the colour, when I looked at it initially, I wasn't that interested in it being all one colour, but actually the art in this is really lovely, and I wouldn't wish for it to be in colour either. I think having it in this nice blue hue really adds to like this like Californian type feel. This book also is about consequences and to when you've made mistakes as well. Probably only took me about an hour and a half to read, but I really enjoyed it. I would probably reread it once more before getting rid of it, but yeah, it was absolutely worth it. I think I rated this 4 stars. Another one which I'm not quite sure how to rate, I don't know if this would be like new adult or border young adult, I'm not sure, but that was The Magician's Guild. This was a book that had been sitting on my shelves for years, and I decided, look, I just need to read it to get it off my shelves. Unfortunately, I did get about 60% of this into this book before I decided I wasn't going to complete this book. The first third of the book was fantastic. It was so good. But then as it got to the middle of the book, I just felt like it wasn't going in a direction that I liked, and that it was dragging on, and I knew how many books was in this series, and I just thought, I think I would rather read a summary on Wikipedia than continue at this point. Which I did, and the premise seemed good, but I'm pleased that I didn't continue on with it really. The novel starts off with a young girl, I think she's about 17 or 18. She lives in a world where you have like magicians and normal people separate in society, and if you are a magician you belong to like a prestigious community, and you are identified from a very young age, and you're trained to learn how to control your powers, and you work for like this greater good. The main character is poor, she lives in slums, she is an orphan that lives with her auntie and uncle, and at a gathering or like a protest, she accidentally displays that she has an ability and that she herself is a magician. So the magicians realized, we need to capture this girl because she won't know how to use her powers, she won't know how to control her powers, she's a danger to herself and to others. However, she doesn't want to go with them because she fears for her life if she goes with them. As an untrained magician, they may decide to end her, so she enlists the help of like, it's like a beggar rogue, sort of like an underground world type boy who I really like actually. I think his character is really good, to keep her safe and hidden away from the magicians. They do quite a good job at this. Sometimes they are found out in ways, and I really enjoyed the cat and mouse element of it, but it just seemed to be carrying on and on and on. I just wasn't really interested in where it was going. But yeah, after reading the summary, I'm pleased I didn't carry on with it. Another one which I'd lump in maybe the new adult category is The Girls by Emma Cline. This is like a Manson family retelling. It's set the 60s, and it had some reference to her being older as an adult in like 2010. And it's a girl who is troubled and bored with her life, and one day she's walking down the street and sees these 3 beautiful teenage girls, and she's very drawn to them and wants to know more about them. She ends up finding out that they are part of like a commune, and she spends days with them and eventually spends more time staying over with this commune. Obviously this commune has a charismatic older man that is telling them what to do, and he's getting them on side, and he's doing things inappropriate with them that they don't understand at the time that it's inappropriate. And then eventually it builds up to this crime or this something happening. Obviously we all know what happened in the Manson family, but throughout the story it does have reference to her life as an adult and what impact that has had on her over time. The premise of this book sounded really good. This was something I was definitely interested in, but I think in the end I did give this 2 stars purely because there was no impact, there was no punch. I don't know if that was because of the writing or there just wasn't enough to the story, but I did have a problem enjoying this book. It just needed more. I also didn't really understand what was going on in the chapters that were set in the modern day. Didn't really see the purpose of them. Couldn't recommend. I think the last book that would fit in with like this new adultish category is Queenie. This is a book that I enjoyed and rated 4 stars. It's not something that I usually read, like a contemporary like this, but I'd heard a lot of good things about it and wanted to read more. Queenie is in her mid-20s and she is going through a breakup. She works as a journalist in London and is not having the best time. She thinks that her and her boyfriend are on a break and the best thing for her to do would be to give them some space. So she moves out of her boyfriend's apartment and into a house share in London. She tries to get her life back on track and live this like independent woman life and makes new relationships at work. But what Queenie doesn't realise is that she's dealing with a lot of childhood trauma and a lot of trauma that she hasn't addressed. Her life starts to fall apart around her and she's not in control of it. She's making decisions that have poor consequences. And it actually felt like a realistic depiction of what it's like to be in your 20s and having your life fall apart. And for a lot of this book, Queenie is on this train that she just cannot stop. The character Queenie is of Jamaican descent, as is the author as well, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it and about her family life, although I have read in some of the reviews that this does come across as being quite stereotypical and harmful, so I'm not too sure how I feel about that, but I did enjoy like her grandmother character. There is like 5 pages in this that reference Black Lives Matter, which I wish had been taken a little bit further. It wouldn't surprise me if this author was using some of her own life experiences in this book, but if that is the case, I feel so sorry for the author. I would recommend it, but I would suggest reading some more reviews about this first to see whether this is a book for you, because it does have some hard-hitting themes. So the next 4 books are all the adult ones that I read, and the first one I'll be talking about is The Binding by Bridget Collins. Loved the cover of this, and this was actually given to me by my gran, who thought that it was a good read. Unfortunately, I rated this 3 stars. I thought it was an okay read. I really loved the premise and I thought it had a lot of promise and potential. The Binding is a story set in this, maybe like an alternative Victorian London, or like outside of London, where the main character is a young man and he is starting an apprenticeship as a binder. A binder is someone who can take a memory from a person and bind it to a book, and that person forgets their memory. So if someone goes through something really traumatizing, they are able to visit a binder, have this memory put into this book, and that book will be stored away in a safe, and they will never get that memory back unless that book is destroyed. That is the ideal way that someone would go about this process. Unfortunately, some of these books are leaked out into the black market, and that causes a negative reputation to be held against binders, because people with money like to read about some of these people's traumatizing memories. I'm sure you can imagine. Some really disturbing people. But the woman that the main character goes to do an apprentice for, she takes her work very seriously, and she really sees it as a healing process for people to forget some memories that maybe they just couldn't live past. However, the main character comes to realise that he himself has a memory that he cannot recall, and he finds a book with his name on it. And so starts off this whole process of trying to get his memory back, and also the person that is in his life that he's forgotten about, them trying to recover their memories as well. I didn't expect this book to be LGBT, but it does actually have a gay relationship in this as well. For me, this book just spent too long in some places and not enough in other places. It was just the execution really, hence the 3 stars. There was a lot of times where I just thought I'm going to just stop reading this, but I pushed through, and it was like a roller coaster, but it had more lows than highs for me. For some people this will be their favourite book, and I can see why, because it's such an amazing premise, but unfortunately it was the execution for me. Next was a book that you've been telling me to read for the longest time. The most popular comments on any of my bookshelf tour videos, or where I show my books, is that I have to read The Kite Runner. And I did, and I'm so pleased that you've been begging me to read it, because I really did enjoy it, and I rated this 5 stars. This book is set in 2 timelines. So part of this book is set in the 1970s Afghanistan before Russia invaded Afghanistan, and then as an adult when the main character now lives in the US. So the main premise of this book is that we follow Amir, who in the 70s is a young boy living in Afghanistan with his dad. They are quite well off and well to do, so they do have help that live with them in their big house. And his dad's like servant is actually his dad's best friend as well. He treats him with a lot of respect, and his son Hassan is Amir's best friend. They are the same age, and Hassan clearly has a lot of respect for Amir, and he does love him back as a best friend. However, some very, very sad events happen to the boys, and they eventually fall out. But not long after that, Russia invades Afghanistan and they have to flee. Amir and his dad make their way to the USA, where he spends his teenage years, and he goes to college, gets a wife, and then in the 2000s he gets a phone call of one of his dad's acquaintances that now lives in Pakistan, and he is telling him that he needs him to visit him in Pakistan, and it becomes quite clear that he will have to return to Afghanistan, which is now under Taliban rule, to try and recover something special. This was a very hard-hitting book. Some of the scenes in this were so upsetting. Like, my god, how upsetting this book was. I can't say I enjoyed it because it made me so upset, but I'm pleased I read it, and it was a fantastic book to read. It was hard to rate purely because of the content, but I did rate this 5 stars. My only critique with this book is that I wish it had spent longer in some parts and less in others, because I could quite happily have read more to this. So the last two are adult crime. I usually read adult crime when I'm just like in between really great books and I need like a palate cleanser, you know? So the first one is The Memory Wood. I rated this 3 stars. Actually, both of them were like 3-star reads. Wasn't that enamored by either of them. In this one, a girl is kidnapped from a chess tournament and kept in the basement of this cabin in like a woodland area in the UK. And while she is captive there, someone called Elijah finds her when he's playing in the woods, and he decides that she's a good friend for him and he wants to play with her. But obviously she's in this awful situation, so she's trying to use him essentially to try and get word out of where she is. As a crime, I didn't think the resolution or the twists or anything were that great, and I thought the ending was a little bit silly, if I'm honest. I don't think I would recommend it necessarily. Yeah, it was just okay. I mean, I didn't gain anything from reading it really. The next one was probably slightly better. I think I would rate this maybe like a 3.5 stars based on comparison to The Memory Wood, and that is The Silent Patient. The twists in this one were a lot better and the crime was a lot better. Alicia is seemingly living a perfect life with her loving husband until something happens one night and she is arrested for her husband's murder. After that point, Alicia does not speak a single word and is charged with her husband's murder and sent to a psychiatric inmate ward. The narrator of this novel is not Alicia herself. It is a psychologist who becomes very interested in her case and gets a job in the hospital that she's being treated at so that he can take over her treatment to try and satisfy his need to know what happened about that night. I did have some problems with some of the depictions in this book, and it is like quite unrealistic, but at the same time I enjoyed it, I guess. I would actually recommend this one for fans of crime. So that is it from me today. I think going forward I'm going to read a lot more young adult and less adult. I just had them on my shelves and had to read them, but I think I'm finding that my reading taste for this year at least, or at this point in time, sits nicely between middle grade and new adult. I'm not really enjoying what I'm reading when I'm reading adult books, which is strange because the older I'm getting, the younger books I want to read. I don't know what that says about me as a person. But if you stuck here this long, thank you for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you've had a good reading month. Let me know what you've been reading as well. If you've read any of these books, I would love to chat with you about them in the comments, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!